Most women aren't afraid of being alone. They're afraid of being misunderstood because they are alone. But the woman who lives without a man and doesn't flinch at the silence has crossed a threshold most never dare approach. She has stepped out of the stories. She has laid down the scripts. She has abandoned the safety of performance and chosen instead the rawness of reality. Her aloneness is not a wound. It is a ritual, a sacred disconnection from the noise of dependency, to return to the voice within, because in a world that teaches women to be chosen, to be soft enough to be liked, quiet enough to be kept, agreeable enough to be adored, she chose instead to be whole and wholeness. That terrifies people. You see, the woman who lives alone is not just single, she is sovereign, and sovereignty is always threatening to the systems that rely on neediness to survive. The industries, the stories, the fragile egos, they all depend on a woman believing she is incomplete without someone to name her valuable. But the truth, she has named herself. She no longer asks, "Am I lovable?" She now asks, "Is this love worthy of me?" That is the shift. And in that sacred solitude, she faces what most people spend their lives avoiding: the hunger, the silence, the ache, the ghosts of her past, the parts of herself she gave away in order to be wanted, the masks she wore so convincingly, she almost forgot her own reflection. But living alone, she meets them all, in the quiet of her own home, in the stillness of her own breath, in the mirror that reflects back not just her face, but her essence. She no longer fills the space with noise. She allows it to echo, and in that echo, something sacred awakens, because she remembers what it felt like to betray herself for approval, to shrink in rooms that couldn't hold her fire, to say yes when her body screamed no, to perform femininity instead of embodying it, to survive love instead of receiving it. And then she rises, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She no longer confuses loneliness with lack. She no longer fills her time with distractions that mask her hunger. She sits with it, breathes with it, learns from it, and in doing so she becomes dangerous to every man who only knew how to possess, not protect, to every system that feeds on compliance, to every voice in her head that once whispered, "You are nothing without someone to choose you." Because now she chooses herself. She lights her own candles at night. She sets her own table. She dances barefoot in her own kitchen without apology. She wakes up in the morning not to serve another, but to meet herself again. There is no audience, no applause, no role to play, only truth, and that truth sets her free. She has learned that solitude is not absence. It is presence, undiluted. And she will not give that up for a love that is conditional, performative, or half awake, because she has become intimate with herself. She knows the architecture of her own mind. She has mapped the topography of her shadows. She has made love to her longing not as a curse, but as a compass. And now, any man who enters her life must come not to complete her, but to meet her, fully, presently, honestly, because she no longer fears being alone. She fears being pulled away from herself in the name of connection. She has learned to live alone is not to lack love. It is to demand that love arrive in its truest form, unfiltered, unmasked, uncompromised, and until that love appears, she will live, not waiting, not yearning, but becoming. She walks through the world not like someone waiting to be found, but like someone who already knows where she is. She does not orbit around another's gravity, she is the center of her own. For The woman who lives alone has tasted something that cannot be bought, borrowed, or begged for. She has tasted freedom. And once you've known that flavor on your tongue, anything less becomes poison. She knows now that being alone isn't about being untouched. It's about being uncompromised. It's the difference between a hand that holds you tightly and one that knows how to hold you rightly. And most women, they never get the chance to make that distinction, because they were told to stay, to please, to endure. But this woman, she left the table where love was no longer being served. She unlearned the fairy tales, the dependence, the idea that her value blooms only in the eyes of another. She no longer waits to be invited. She builds her own house, one brick at a time, layered with the mortar of self-respect, sealed with silence, solitude, and fierce self-possession, and the world misunderstands her. They say she is cold, too independent, too intense, too much. But that's the language of those who've only known women as reflections of themselves. They fear what they cannot control. They mock what they do not understand. They shame what they secretly desire to become. Because deep down, everyone envies a woman who no longer begs to be seen. She becomes a mirror, not because she shows others who they are, but because she reflects who she refuses to be anymore. She refuses to shrink, to fit their comfort. She refuses to be palatable. She refuses to trade her fire for affection. And so she lives, with her books, her candles, her art, her breath, her rituals. She doesn't just pass time, she creates it. She no longer asks what a man can give her. She asks whether his presence enhances the masterpiece she's already become. Her bed is not empty, it is sacred, and only those who speak the language of depth, reverence, and truth may enter. And when men do come, because they will drawn to her silence, her strength, her serenity, they often don't know what to do with her. She is not needy. She is not reactive. She is not impressed by performative masculinity. She sees through masks. She senses hidden motives. She has danced with her demons. She won't flinch at yours. And so, many fall in love with the idea of her, but few can hold her in reality, because she does not tolerate shallow waters. She has swum too long in the oceans of her own soul to pretend that puddles are enough. She is not a project to be fixed. She is not a role to be played. She is not waiting to be saved. She has done the saving for herself, and in that salvation she has made peace with her past. She has kissed the wounds, held the little girl who once begged for love, and told her, "We don't beg anymore. We become." And you, if you are watching this, and your soul stirs, it is not by accident. You, too, have heard the whisper that you are meant to know yourself before anyone else ever claims to. That love without awareness is a trap. That silence is a teacher. That solitude is a rite of passage, not a punishment. So if you find yourself alone, let it not be a curse. Let it be a cathedral, because the woman who builds a life she loves alone will never again settle for being tolerated in someone else's. She will wait, not because she is desperate, but because she is disciplined. She has tasted what it means to be whole, and now she hungers only for what is real. She no longer seeks love that demands her silence in exchange for affection. She no longer molds herself into smaller shapes to fit inside someone else's frame of comfort. That season is over. The woman who lives alone has burned those contracts, those unwritten agreements that once said, "If I am pleasing, maybe I will be loved. If I am soft, maybe I will be kept." No more. She has rewritten the covenant with herself. And this time, it reads, I will not abandon myself just to be chosen by someone else. She does not fear an empty home. She fears a life filled with empty conversations, hollow touch, and connection that feels more like survival than celebration. For her, aloneness is no longer absence, it is essence. It is where her power breathes, and when dusk falls, and the light grows long across her living room floor, she does not reach for distraction, she does not numb, she listens, because the silence speaks now, and she's learned it never lies. In that silence, she has heard the echoes of past versions of herself. The girl who cried for attention, the woman who apologized for being too passionate, too emotional, too intense, the lover who once stayed with someone just because it felt safer than the unknown. They all still live within her, but they no longer lead. She honors them, but she no longer obeys them, because the woman who lives alone has done the work, the deep, excruciating, unglamorous inner work. She has sat across from her own shadow, the jealous one, the bitter one, the fearful one, and looked them in the eyes. She did not flinch. She did not run. She said, come in, let's speak. And they spoke. They told her the truth, that she had been performing a version of herself for love, that she had been giving her sacred energy to those who hadn't earned her access, that she had been asking broken people to show her she was whole, but not anymore. Now she walks differently. She speaks slowly, not because she lacks words, but because she understands their power. She chooses her battles, her lovers, her rituals, with care, and those who meet her know friends, strangers, potential partners. They sense it. They sense that there is no room to manipulate, no cracks to exploit. There is only presence, depth, clarity. They either rise to meet it, or quietly fade away. And here's the truth no one tells you. The woman who lives alone, who truly lives alone, not in punishment, but in presence, she becomes terrifying. To those who rely on distraction for meaning, she is a threat to the systems that say a woman must be tethered to be worthy. She is dangerous to the narratives that only understand her through the gaze of a man. She is revolutionary to the world that taught her to serve first, speak second, and feel last. But she is not angry. She is just clear that her time is not infinite. Clear that her soul was not made to beg for crumbs. Clear that anyone who enters her life must bring peace, not chaos. Depth, not performance. Reverence, not convenience. And if no one comes, she will still dance in the kitchen, still sing to the moon, still wrap herself in soft sheets and sacred books and dreams that are hers alone, because she has already chosen herself, and that changes everything. There comes a point in a woman's life when she no longer yearns for applause from the balcony of society. She no longer waits for validation in the eyes of a man who never learned to see. The woman who lives alone has crossed that threshold. She has walked herself through fire and learned that the deepest kind of intimacy is the one she forges with her own soul. She has stopped chasing the illusion of being completed, because now she understands she was never incomplete to begin with. The world just convinced her that her wholeness was dangerous, that her fullness had to be split between roles. The sweet girl, the good wife, the agreeable companion, all diluted versions of the wild, sovereign woman she was born to be. And so she peeled off the layers, slowly, painfully, tenderly, the expectations, the guilt, the conditioned loyalty, until all that was left was essence, raw, honest, unfiltered. Essence, Do you know how many women fear that moment? To sit in silence without a role to perform, to walk through a day without needing to be needed, to exist without asking for permission. But the woman who lives alone has made peace with the void. She doesn't just endure it, she inhabits it. She lights candles in the darkness. She creates ceremony from solitude. She builds altars out of routines. Every morning she makes her tea. It becomes an act of devotion, not to someone else, but to herself. Because solitude, to her, is no longer loneliness. It's a form of prayer, and yet this kind of woman disturbs others. Not because she is cruel, not because she is arrogant, but because she is sovereign, because she no longer plays the game. She doesn't flirt with half-interest. She doesn't respond to breadcrumbs. She doesn't water herself down to be more digestible. She knows her emotional body too well now. She senses energetic imbalances instantly. She detects manipulation not by words, but by tone. She feels when a man wants her warmth, but not her fire, when he wants her softness, but not her power, and she chooses silence over performance, distance over drama, depth over temporary highs. That is the woman who lives alone. She has become the mirror reflecting back to others what they've abandoned in themselves. And so, some men approach her not because they're ready, but because they want to feel ready. Because her presence makes them remember what it feels like to stand before a woman who doesn't need them, but could choose them. And that difference shakes the very foundations of men who have only known power through control. For centuries, society has told women, be less so he can feel more, shrink so he can expand, soften so he won't run. But the woman who lives alone, she no longer negotiates with those rules. She no longer plays the game of strategic submission. She stands as a reminder of what real feminine energy looks like when it is unchained. Not docile, not passive, but deep, radiant, untamed. She can hold space, she can hold pain, she can hold you, but she will never hold herself back again. Because once a woman has tasted the peace of her own presence, once she's built a home inside herself so sacred that no chaos can shake it, she will never again choose love that costs her that sanctuary. The woman who lives alone isn't just surviving, she's becoming the embodiment of every ancestor who was silenced, becoming the voice for every younger version of herself that was told, you're too much. She is not too much. She is precisely enough, and the man who will love her won't just tolerate that truth, he will rise to meet it. She walks barefoot through her solitude, not as a prisoner to isolation, but as a priestess of inner richness. Her space is sacred because she's made it so, not with luxury, but with intention. Everything she touches bears the quiet signature of someone who has learned to love their own presence. The books that rest on her table, the scent she chooses to infuse into the air, the silence that doesn't scream but soothes. These are not signs of someone missing something. These are the quiet emblems of someone who has found herself. The world, of course, does not know what to do with a woman like her. She is the myth broken free from its cage. She is the archetype that refused to stay in the story. Society looks at her with narrowed eyes, whispering in tones both curious and uneasy. Why is she alone? Who left her? What went wrong? Because when a woman is not tethered to a man, the world assumes something must be broken, as if her value still depends on how well she is possessed. But no, nothing went wrong. She simply awakened. She chose not to settle. She chose not to trade her peace for a placeholder. She chose her soul over scripts written by fear, And you listening, do you feel that longing? That edge within your chest that knows you've been performing softness to be loved, shrinking to be palatable, biting your tongue to be chosen. Let that ache speak. Let it rise. Because in that ache is the seed of the woman you could become. The woman who lives alone doesn't always feel strong. That's the beauty of her truth. She's not a statue carved from stone. She weeps when the weight presses too hard. She curls into herself when old wounds are stirred. But she no longer shames her pain. She holds it, rocks it, speaks to it with the voice she was once denied. Her strength isn't in pretending not to break. It's in her ability to rebuild herself again and again without asking someone else to do it for her. In the language of Carl Jung, she has faced her shadow, not once, but many times. She's danced with the versions of herself she used to disown: the needy girl, the jealous woman, the angry daughter. She looked each one in the eye and said, "You are part of me too." And in doing so, she became whole. That wholeness makes her magnetic. Not because she flaunts it, not because she demands to be seen, but because it's rare. And in a world addicted to illusions and performance, authenticity feels like lightning. It cracks something open, and those brave enough to witness it are changed forever. Some men will approach her, thinking they are ready for her depth. They will marvel at her emotional vocabulary, her sensual self-possession, her intuitive knowing. But soon they'll realize this woman isn't here to fill a gap in their soul. She is not the balm for their mother wounds. She is not the reward for surviving mediocrity. She is not the one who will make them feel like men. She requires that. They already are. To be with her is to stand exposed, and many will run. But the one who stays, he will be a man who is also sat with his darkness. A man who doesn't flinch when met with emotional honesty. A man who doesn't mistake her freedom for rejection, her standards for pride, her solitude for sadness. He will not just love her, he will honor her. Not with flowery words, but with presence. Not with promises, but with consistency. Not with possession, but with partnership. Because he knows the woman who lives alone is not desperate to be saved. She has already saved herself, and that is what makes her irresistible. She no longer walks into love blind. The woman who lives alone sees clearly now too clearly, some would say. Her heart has been refined by silence, her intuition sharpened. In the stillness where others would drown, she knows the quiet hunger behind false compliments. She can feel the hidden tremor in a man's voice when he's performing strength he hasn't earned. She's learned to decode the micro-expressions, the pauses that mean fear, the overreactions that mean insecurity, not because she's cynical, but because solitude has made her wise. You might wonder, does she ever miss the warmth of a man beside her? Of course, but not at the cost of her peace, not at the cost of her dignity. She knows now that loneliness and partnership are not opposites. You can be lonelier in someone's arms than you are in your own bed. You can feel more abandoned inside a relationship than outside of one. And so she chose to walk away from the illusion of connection and toward the truth of self. There are moments when she remembers her old self, the one who waited for texts, who tried to fix broken men, who believed that if she just loved enough, he would finally heal. That woman died a sacred death, and in her place rose the woman you see now. A woman who no longer begs to be chosen. A woman who knows that her time, her energy, her body are offerings, not obligations. She doesn't just give them away. You must earn them. This is the woman who has made peace with the masculine within herself, That's the secret most never learn. She doesn't need a man to complete her, because she has integrated her own inner king. She provides structure to her chaos. She protects her inner child. She balances her softness with fierce. That inner marriage between her feminine soul and masculine discipline has given her the power to walk away from anything that insults her spirit. Most women are taught to collapse into relationships, to merge, to disappear. But she has learned to expand inside of one, to keep her identity even in love, to remain whole, and this wholeness is her power. She will not tolerate breadcrumbing, emotional laziness, or passive aggression dressed as masculinity. If you cannot meet her in truth, she will walk, not out of anger, but out of reverence for herself. Her solitude has not made her hard. No, it has made her clear. There's a difference. She still believes in love, in deep, devotional, soul-bearing love, but she no longer sees love as a rescue. It is a union of two already formed beings, not a merger of wounds disguised as romance. So if you meet her really, meet her be ready. She won't play games. She won't chase. She won't make herself smaller to soothe your ego. But she will challenge you to rise, to meet her where she stands, to become a man who's not intimidated by her freedom, but inspired by it. And if you can't, she'll let you go with grace. She won't fight for your potential. She won't argue for crumbs, because she's tasted the sweetness of her own company. She knows her worth, and she knows that anything built on fear, on lack, on compromise of soul will always rot from within. The woman who lives alone has become the fire, the mirror, the quiet storm. She is not for the faint of heart. She is for the man who has died his own deaths, who has buried his illusions, who has met his demons in the dark and returned with light in his eyes. A man who no longer seeks a mother or a nurse or a fan but a partner. She is not waiting. She is living, and in that living she is more radiant than ever, more untouchable, more desired, more whole, because her life is not on hold. It is unfolding. She wakes up slowly, no alarm, no voice pulling her into action for someone else. The morning belongs to her. There is no rush, no urgent text demanding a piece of her. Energy, no emotional labor before coffee. Just the hum of her breath, the soft thud of her feet against the floor, the ritual of being in tune with her own rhythm. This is not loneliness. This is sovereignty. She moves like a woman who answers to something deeper than social expectation. A woman who doesn't shape her existence around a man's gaze, who no longer orbits the gravitational pull of his moods, his chaos, his need for reassurance disguised as charm. She stepped out of that orbit. Now she revolves around her own sun. There's a myth they tell about women like her, too hard to love, too independent, too damaged, too masculine. But that myth is a projection spoken by those who fear what they cannot possess. Her independence is not a wall, it is a gate. And only a man who is rooted in his own identity has the key to walk through. She doesn't seek comfort in false intimacy. She doesn't need flattery to feel seen, because she sees herself. And in doing so, she's learned the difference between desire and dependency, between connection and addiction. She has unhooked herself from the need to be wanted, and doing so has become irresistible. You might think her strength makes her cold, but it's the opposite. Her boundaries have made space for true warmth to return, the kind that doesn't burn her out or set her on fire just to feel alive. She has made room for slowness, for soul, for sacred silence. She has built a temple, Within her solitude, in a world obsessed with pairings, with coupledom as currency, she dares to walk alone, not as a rejection of love, but as a return to essence. She remembers now. She was whole before she was ever touched, and she will remain whole long after. This remembering is her liberation. There are nights when the ache returns, the ache for fingers intertwined, for whispers in the dark. But even in that longing, she does not lose herself. She feels the ache without becoming it. She knows that ache is not weakness. It is proof that her heart still beats with wild tenderness. It is proof she has not hardened, only healed. Her time alone has been an initiation, through grief, through growth, through facing the shadows she once tried to silence in the arms of men. And now she dances with those shadows. She knows their names. She no longer fears them. She has done the work most avoid, and now walks with a grace born only from pain, alchemized into wisdom. She is not against men. She is simply no longer willing to betray herself for their comfort. She no longer plays roles, no longer mothers. A lover no longer seduces with submission just to feel chosen. The performance has ended, and what's left is truth. She is the woman who dares to choose herself, not because she hates men, but because she no longer needs one to feel like a woman. And yet when a man does arrive, if he arrives, she will not make him the center of her world. She will invite him into her world, but she will never abandon it. She will love fully but not blindly. She will give but not bleed. She will open but never collapse. Because this woman knows the deepest intimacy does not come from dependency. It comes from freedom. From two complete beings who choose to meet in the space between, not to fill a void, but to build a new universe. And if no such man comes, she will still rise each morning with purpose, still light candles at dusk, still dance to her own rhythm, still write poetry in the quiet, because her life is not a placeholder for romance. It is the romance. This is the truth about women who live alone. They are not waiting. They are not broken. They are not incomplete. They are the storm and the stillness, the wilderness and the wisdom, the fire that does not beg to be tamed. There is a certain fear she inspires, not because she is aggressive, but because she is unclaimed. Society doesn't know what to do with a woman who cannot be controlled by attention or diminished by absence. She is not tethered to anyone's timeline. She does not fear the silence that most try to drown out with company. She is comfortable there, in the deep stillness most find unbearable. She has stopped apologizing for the life she chooses. The empty seat across her dining table is not a symbol of lack, it is a canvas, a space reserved not for the next man to fill, but for presence, alignment, something earned, not just offered. She will not shrink to accommodate fragility. She will not be the reward for potential. She will only respond to energy that matches her own depth, her own fire, her own clarity. You can feel the difference when she speaks. There is no hunger in her voice, no desperation hiding behind politeness. Her words land heavy, slow, with the weight of someone who has excavated herself. She has sat with her own demons and now sees through yours. She will not be lured by charisma without character. Not anymore. The woman who lives alone knows the cost of peace, and she guards it with the ferocity of someone who has lived in the chaos of false love. She has buried versions of herself that begged to be kept, that bent to be wanted. She has grieved the girl who performed niceness just to be spared abandonment. That girl is gone, and in her place stands someone unapologetically whole. She doesn't chase, Not because she's arrogant, but because chasing implies something is running. She doesn't run anymore, and she doesn't try to catch what's not meant for her. She walks at her own pace. If you catch up, it's because you're ready, not because she slowed down. She has tasted the sweetness of her own company, drank deeply from the well of solitude until her thirst for external validation dried up. She has learned to be her own witness, her own mirror, her own sanctuary, and in that inner temple she has found what most are still searching for in others. Home there are women who enter love like it's a rescue mission. She does not need a man to lift her from suffering or save her from herself. She has already done that. What she seeks now is not rescue, but resonance. A man who does not fear the brilliance of a woman who needs nothing from him, yet chooses to open to him anyway. And she knows. The man who is not intimidated by that kind of power is rare, but he exists. He is not threatened by her fire, because he has walked through his own. He does not need to conquer her to feel masculine. He is secure enough to meet her eye to eye, soul to soul. Until then, or even if never, she lives, fully, deeply, sensually. She fills her space with meaning, with music that moves her hips, with books that feed her intellect, with moments that bring her closer to the divine within. She does not wait for life to begin once a man arrives. Her life is the beginning. Every single day. Have you ever met a woman like that? One whose energy feels like a mirror to your own insecurities. One who doesn't flinch when you pull away. Who doesn't soften just to be more palatable. Who looks you in the eye and dares you to rise into your own integrity. She will not tolerate half-love. Not because she's bitter, but because she is finally sweet with herself. She will not explain why she's too much. She will not apologize for what she needs. She is not looking to be chosen, she is the choice. And here's the paradox. The more deeply she roots into her own worth, the more magnetic she becomes. Not for everyone, but for those who can see, truly see. Beyond the performance, beyond the conditioning, beyond the ego, to the raw luminous force that lives in a woman who has walked through fire and came out holy. She is not for the faint of heart. She is not for the insecure. She is not for the ones who want easy love, transactional love, predictable love. She is for the brave, for the awake, for the man who knows that to love a woman like her is to enter a sacred rite of passage, and still if that man never comes, she will not crumble, because she is not waiting to be loved. She is learning to love herself in ways that make the world stop and stare, and so she walks not away from men, but deeper into herself, into the forest of unspoken fears, abandoned dreams, unmet desires, the kind of place where silence isn't empty, it echoes. Every footstep she takes in solitude reverberates through the inner halls of her being, shaking loose the ghosts of everything she was told to be. The woman who lives alone is not retreating from love. She's retreating from performance, from the exhausting theater of pretending to be soft when she feels fire, to be agreeable when her truth howls like a wolf behind her ribcage. She is not anti-man, she is anti, and until she can love from a place of truth, she will not offer her heart to anyone unprepared to hold it raw. Some call her lonely, but they confuse aloneness with emptiness, and presence with codependence. She is not empty, she is overflowing, with wisdom, with rage, with grace, with knowing. She doesn't need to fill a house with noise to feel alive. The sound of her breath in the dark, the way sunlight kisses the side of her tea mug in the morning, these are enough, because she is enough. Do you understand what it means to face yourself without distraction? to sit with the ache of being unseen, without rushing to be validated, to learn to love the parts of yourself no one clapped for. That's the quiet revolution. She lives every day, and it is not for the faint of heart. She is a woman in reclamation, of time, of boundaries, of energy. She doesn't explain why she stopped answering texts that drained her, why she deleted half her wardrobe because it was never chosen for her, but for male approval, why her smile is no longer automatic, but earned. This is the woman who has exited the stage of her old life and entered the temple of her real self, the archetype of the sovereign woman. It's not new. It is ancient. It was once the priestess in the temple, the oracle on the mountain, the huntress under the moon. She wasn't made for a cage or a pedestal. She was made for the in-between spaces, the wild, the void, the sacred unknown. Jung spoke of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are, beyond social identity, ego, and inherited scripts. That is what she is undergoing, every day, without fanfare, without applause. Alone in the inner workshop of the soul, she dismantles the girl who needed rescuing and reforges herself as a woman who rescues herself. The girl who was afraid to speak now roars in silence. The girl who feared abandonment now chooses solitude. The girl who used to mold herself into someone else's fantasy now melts down the mold and drinks from the fire. Her apartment isn't just a home. It's a sanctuary, a lab, a battlefield, a womb, a place where she bleeds, breaks, rebuilds, and rises. There are no performance lights here, no role to play, just the truth, and that truth is sacred. It may look simple to the world, laundry on the line, books on the nightstand, candles flickering in the stillness, but inside, entire galaxies are shifting. Have you ever felt the storm beneath your skin when you stopped running from your own reflection? The women who live alone know this feeling well. They've stared into the abyss of unworthiness and asked it for its name. They've danced with the loneliness that comes when you refuse to settle. They've tasted the bitter medicine of truth and found it was sweeter than lies ever could be. To live alone, truly, is to choose yourself again and again. Not out of bitterness, not out of fear, but because you finally see your soul as something worth returning to, again and again. And not everyone deserves a front row seat to that ceremony. This kind of woman doesn't chase love, she magnetizes it, not through effort, but through essence, through stillness, through standards, through the quiet refusal to abandon herself again for temporary warmth. And make no mistake, she feels everything. The ache of a hand not held, the cold of a bed untouched, the sting of knowing most men still fear a woman they cannot control. But she does not numb it. She breathes through it, because she knows the loneliness of integrity is far better than the company of someone who costs you your peace. There's a certain power that rises in a woman when she stops waiting for a man to call, waiting for someone to choose her, waiting for her worth to be confirmed by someone else's presence, waiting for the fairy tale ending that was never hers to begin with. She stops waiting and starts becoming. This is what the world doesn't understand. Her solitude is not a punishment, it's a forge. Each quiet night hammers something deeper into her soul. Each unanswered question chisels a clearer version of who she is. And in this process, she is not shrinking, she is sharpening. Her boundaries become sacred, her no becomes holy. Her silence becomes a roar to those who once mistook her softness for submission. She is no longer available for men who love her halfway, no longer willing to participate in the emotional charity of healing men who haven't even begun to heal themselves. She is done babysitting egos, done mothering broken boys disguised as grown men. She is not heartless, she is heart-wise. You see, once a woman learns how to live alone, something irreversible happens. She realizes she would rather be alone in truth than partnered in pretense. She understands that love isn't about proximity, it's about presence. And many who claim to love her were never really present. They were just convenient. Men who meet her now feel something different. They feel the absence of need in her. And for some, that absence is unsettling, because their worth was built on being needed, not being deeply known. But this woman no longer operates on survival attachments. She doesn't need a man, she desires one. And there's a world of difference between the two. To be needed is to be consumed. To be desired is to be chosen, freely, consciously. Deeply, she no longer builds her identity in relation to a man. She doesn't ask, will he like me if I wear this, say this, shrink here? No, she dresses for herself, speaks with clarity, takes up space. She's not performing anymore, she's living. Carl Jung once said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid confronting their own soul, but not her. She confronts it daily, in the stillness of her apartment, in the absence of noise, in the presence of herself. She faces the shadow, the ego, the ache of old wounds, and she integrates them, one by one. That's the quiet alchemy of the woman who lives alone. Have you ever met a woman who radiates peace without trying, who doesn't seek attention, but commands it by simply being rooted? That kind of woman has walked through fire. She has buried versions of herself no one will ever see. She has cried behind closed doors and risen without anyone applauding. Her glow is not cosmetic, it's earned. It comes from the work, the inner work, the kind of work most avoid. She may post less, share less, entertain less, but don't mistake that for passivity. It is precision. She now chooses where her energy goes, who gets to hear her laughter, who gets to witness her softness, who earns the right to sit at her table. And not everyone qualifies, because once you've built your own sanctuary, you won't let chaos move in and call it love. The truth is, women who live alone don't hate men. They simply refuse to be undone by them. They've loved too hard, given too much, lost themselves too often to go back to that pattern. Now, love must arrive differently, gently, powerfully, respectfully. She doesn't require perfection, but she requires presence, truth, effort. A man who has looked in his own mirror, faced his own demons, and is not intimidated by hers. A man who doesn't flinch at her strength, nor shrink from her standards. That is rare. But she'd rather wait for rare than settle for ready-made comfort. Because she has become the love she once begged for. She has mothered herself, fathered herself, forgiven herself, reclaimed herself, and now she doesn't need someone to fix her. She wants someone who doesn't fear her wholeness. This is the truth about women who live alone. They are not broken. They are becoming, not desperate, but discerning. And every day they choose themselves. They rewrite the myth that a woman is only complete when loved by a man. No, the woman who lives alone has already been completed. And now, love is simply the icing on a cake she already baked. Here is something sacred about a woman who has become her own home. She doesn't just live alone, she is alone, in the highest sense of the word. Alone, not in isolation, but in sovereignty. Alone, not in absence, but in essence. Alone, not because she couldn't find someone, but because she found herself first, and what she found was not emptiness, but electricity, not a void, but a voice, not lack, but light. Her aloneness is not a cage, it's a cathedral, a place of quiet rituals, a sanctuary where her soul can speak without interruption. She dances without music. She reads until her eyes ache. She makes tea like it's a prayer. No one's watching, and that's exactly why she thrives. She no longer needs an audience to feel alive. She has become the witness of her own worth. But make no mistake, this solitude didn't come easy. It came through storms. There were nights she screamed into pillows, asking why the men she loved couldn't hold her heart with reverence. Why? She kept giving her deepest oceans to men who only waded in shallow waters. Why every time she dimmed her light to fit into someone else's world, the darkness swallowed her. It took her breaking again and again to realize that no man could carry what she hadn't first claimed for herself, so she stopped asking for permission, stopped trying to be the cool girl, stopped laughing at jokes that hurt her soul, stopped shrinking. She grew, quietly, relentlessly, from the inside out, and now she walks differently, not just in posture, but in presence. When she enters a room, the air shifts, not because she's loud, but because she's grounded. Her energy speaks before her lips ever move. Some men call it intimidating, but the ones who are ready call it inspiring, because the woman who lives alone has become fluent in emotional truth. She sees through games. She smells fear. She reads the pauses between sentences. She knows when a man is speaking from his chest or hiding behind his charm. And she's not interested in charm, she's interested in character. She is a mirror, and not every man is ready to see what she reflects back. Most aren't, because to be with her, truly with her, is to be seen in full. Not just the parts you perform well, but the parts you hide. The shame, the guilt, the wounds, the masks. She doesn't fall in love with potential anymore. She falls in love with presence, with the man who stands in the fire of his own evolution, unafraid to burn away what no longer serves him, because that's what she's done. And let's be honest, she still feels the ache. Sometimes she still yearns for arms to wrap around her at night, for a voice in the kitchen, for laughter that isn't just her own. But she has learned the difference between desire and desperation. She can want love without needing it to feel whole, and that makes her dangerous to the status quo. Because a woman who isn't waiting to be saved can't be controlled. She becomes immune to manipulation, uninterested in superficial praise, unmoved by half-hearted attempts. And that's terrifying, not to the masculine, but to the immature masculine. The mature masculine sees her and softens, not out of weakness, but out of reverence. He doesn't compete with her independence, he honors it. He doesn't feel threatened by her solitude, he trusts it, because he has walked his own lonely roads, faced his own shadow, and in her strength he sees reflection, not resistance. Together, they don't complete each other, they complement each other. But until then, she waits, not passively, not longingly, but powerfully. She fills her days with purpose, not pretense, her bed with peace, not performance, her mind with clarity, not confusion. She no longer asks, "Why hasn't he come?" She asks, "How can I become even more of who I am?" Because when he comes, if he ever does, she won't need saving, she will need recognition, respect, resonance. And if he cannot meet her there, at the edge of her evolution, she will smile gently and return to her books, her prayers, her garden, her art, her freedom, because that, too, is love. Love for the self, love for the sacred, love for the life she has built alone. To live alone as a woman is to step outside of society's comfort zone, because society doesn't quite know what to do with a woman who doesn't need, only wants. A woman who doesn't chase validation, only protects her vibration. A woman who doesn't apologize for her solitude, only honors it like sacred ground. You see, we were taught to believe that silence in a woman's home meant something was missing. But no one ever asked if the silence was chosen, if the peace was earned, if the stillness was her sanctuary, not her sentence. Because when a woman finally walks away from everything false, the false smiles, the false lovers, the false roles, she enters a space that is unfamiliar to most but unforgettable once touched, emotional sovereignty, and in that place, she begins the truest work of all, not decorating her apartment, but redecorating her beliefs. Not chasing someone to share a bed with, but exploring the dreams that come to her when the world is asleep. Not wondering why no one calls, but listening to the whisper of her own soul. Most people won't understand her anymore, not her family, not her co-workers, not her past lovers. They'll wonder why she doesn't settle down, why she's still single, why she's too picky. They don't realize it's not pickiness, it's precision, because she has done the unglamorous work of healing, sitting with her own pain, tracing the roots of her patterns, looking into the mirror without makeup, without masks, without distractions, and asking the most difficult question: where was I when I abandoned myself? That's the moment the old self begins to die, and from that quiet death rises the woman no one saw coming. She doesn't need a spotlight, she is the fire. She doesn't need a savior, she is the sword. She doesn't need to be chosen, because she already chose herself. This doesn't mean she has hardened. Quite the opposite. She has become soft in the right places. Soft in compassion, soft in understanding, soft in how she holds her inner child. But she has also become sharp where it counts, sharp in discernment, sharp in boundaries, sharp in protecting the peace she bled to build. This duality is what makes her magnetic and misunderstood. Some will say she's too much, others will say she's too independent. But the ones who see clearly will say, there goes a woman who has returned to herself, and in returning to herself, she has returned to truth. Truth that love is not about completion, but expansion. Truth that solitude is not a punishment, but a purification. Truth that the feminine, in its rawest form, is not passive. It is powerful, perceptive, profound. She may still ache for touch, for deep conversation, for skin against skin, but she no longer seeks it to escape herself. She seeks it to merge, consciously, not to disappear, because disappearing is what she used to do. She used to disappear behind relationships, behind roles, behind trying to be what he wanted, what they wanted. And in doing so, she dimmed her own flame. But now, she tends to that flame like it's sacred. She guards her inner fire with reverence, and only invites in those who carry fire of their own. Men can feel this, the real ones. They won't approach her with games. They won't approach her with confusion. They'll approach her with presence, or not at all, because something inside them knows this is not a woman to be trifled with. This is not a woman to try things out with. This is a woman to rise for, or be left behind by, because she doesn't just want company. She wants consciousness, and until that consciousness arrives in the form of a man, or perhaps just in deeper layers of her own being, she remains sovereign, not waiting. not wishing, just becoming, because becoming is what she was born to do. And the woman who becomes herself fully is never truly alone. She no longer waits by the window. The days of longing for someone to knock, to fill the silence, to complete what she once believed was incomplete, those days have burned away like mist at sunrise. In their place stands something rarer, a woman who is whole. She has walked through the valley of absence. She has sat at dinner tables set for one, heard the echo of her own voice in the quiet hallways of her home, and felt the weight of no one checking in, and yet she never crumbled. No, she blossomed, because solitude didn't break her, it sculpted her. The world whispers that a woman alone must be lacking, that her solitude is sadness, that her independence is bitterness. But that's projection, the echo of a society terrified of feminine power unbound. Because a woman who lives alone and feels no void cannot be controlled. She's not searching, she's not waiting, she is becoming. You see, aloneness is not loneliness, not for her. It's a sacred initiation, a spiritual rite. In the silence, she met her shadow. She saw the parts of herself she once buried under the distractions of relationships. The need to please, the hunger to be wanted. She faced the little girl inside who thought love had to be earned, who believed her body was her currency, her softness a liability. And one by one, she reclaimed her. She started lighting candles, not to set a mood for someone else, but to honor her own presence. She wore silk robes for no one's gaze but her own. She laughed loudly at books, cried quietly during songs, and walked through forests where no one could see her, not because she was hiding, but because she was home. And this is the secret that unsettles people. A woman who lives alone learns how to mother herself. She becomes her own mirror, her own muse, her own savior. And because of that, she becomes deeply, profoundly magnetic. Not the desperate kind of magnetism that clings, but the sovereign kind that chooses her standards. Rise because she no longer negotiates her peace for fleeting affection. She does not confuse intensity for intimacy. She's tasted freedom now, and no attention is worth giving it up. So when she finally opens her door again, if she chooses to, it will not be out of lack, but out of abundance. She won't chase. She won't shrink. She won't mold herself to fit someone else's idea of worthy. Instead, she will stand in the full light of her womanhood, mysterious, whole, and unapologetically free. Because the woman who walks through the fire of solitude emerges untouchable, not cold, not numb, but clear. And once a woman sees herself fully, no one else can define her again. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.